Good afternoon, students. I hope all of you are doing good and I hope your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 21st of December 2023 and we are here to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. The handout of this session is there in the description box. You may utilize it to streamline your current affairs preparation. Now coming to the table of contents for today. First topic, a very important topic, is related to India's education sector. The second topic is related to inflation, the demand or supply issues with inflation. Third topic is related to sovereign artificial intelligence. Fourth topic is related to LRS scheme, that is Liberalized Remittance scheme. And last but not the least is related to India's Telegraph Act of 1885. So let's start with the first topic. So the first topic is related to India's education sector. Now, why this is in news? Because an editorial has appeared based on fixing the broken education system of India. For a general studies paper 2 related to issues relating to development and management of social sector relating to health education, the education sector has been categorically mentioned in our GS paper 2 syllabus. That is why it becomes important for us. Now, coming to India's education sector. Now, before understanding about education sector and scenario in India, we have to understand what is the importance of education for a nation, for any nation and for a nation like India in particular. Now, according to Nelson Mandela has very rightfully said that education is the most powerful tool with which you can change the entire world. And Aristotle has also said that education of mind without education of heart is no education at all, right? So importance of education is reflected in the quotes which we discussed just right now, that education builds in the capacity of a nation. When we compare the case studies of South Korea, Singapore with that of India, whereby we all got independence during the same frame period of time, right? And all of us were equally devastated. But eventually South Korea went on to develop itself and develop its country into next level. And Singapore also developed its country to next level. So what was the factor and what was the primest reason that these countries, and especially the Nordic countries or the Scandinavian countries, they are able to develop themselves to that great extent? The main reason is focus on education. Their education system is very robust, education system is very, very resilient. And of course, it is qualitative. So quality education is the most important factor if you have to see that how a nation would develop, how a nation would prosper. If you see all the other things around a nation, that is your standard of living, or let's say technology or research and development, healthcare sector, any other sector which you see, ultimately who is involved in those sectors? Humans. And if humans are not educated, they would not be able to perform well. So education is the basic tenet on which a nation is built. That is why education for India especially, it is of utmost importance. And not just education, but qualitative education for India is very, very important. Now, keeping these things in mind, let us understand what is the status of education sector in our country. So starting with the gross enrollment ratio in the higher education sector. That is the higher education, what is the gross enrollment ratio? That on a gross level, how many students are enrolling for higher education? And that gross enrollment ratio is just 27.1% in our country, which is abysmally low. And according to the QS World University rankings as well, only three Indian universities, come in the top 200 universities of the world. India, with a population of 1.4 billion people, having thousands of universities, just three universities appear in the top 200 list of QS World University rankings, which again tells us that higher education or education in our country, it's not qualitative. Of course, there are a lot of schools, lot of colleges, lot of universities, but quality is also what matters. And coming to the literacy rate, according to NSO, National Statistical Office, 2021, the average literacy rate of India is close to 77%. Now, under that, male literacy rate is 84%, female literacy rate is 70%, rural literacy rate is 73.5%, and urban literacy rate is 87.7%. Of course, our motive should be to achieve all these literacy rates 95% plus, right? And of course, literacy is not equal to education. Literacy means that how many people are basically able to read and write a language, right? That is your literacy rate. But literacy, again, is a bedrock on which education is built. If you're not literate, getting education becomes very difficult in the current scenario, especially, right? So that is why literacy forms the foundation block for education. Education forms the foundation block for entire gamut of activities which are happening in this world, right? So education is the basic tenet of everything all around us. Now, what the classification of education sector in our country is? Of course, it's divided into pre-primary first, then primary education, pre-primary education, primary education, secondary education, senior secondary education, and then higher education. Higher education, of course, involves your colleges, universities, postgraduates, graduates level exams. So that is your pre-primary, primary, secondary, senior secondary, and higher education. That is the classification of education in our country. Now, coming to the most important topic, that what are the issues and challenges which are ailing our education sector and which are there in our education sector because of which we are not able to prosper, and the factors which are inhibiting India to achieve the full potential in our education sector. So let's start one by one. First is, of course, which we have been talking about a lot of times, education quality. Of course, there are a lot of schools, there are a lot of colleges, universities, but the curriculum which is taught to them, is that qualitative? The answer is no. The teachers who teach them, are they qualitative? Are they equipped enough? Not all of them, right? Because there is no uniform teaching guideline which is available. There are no uniform teaching practices which are there. There are no uniform teacher training programs which are present, right? So because of these reasons, quality of education suffers. That is why you will see that in rural areas, the quality of education is very poor. In urban areas, in some of the schools, the quality education is there. And in many of the schools, again, there is no quality education. And education is of no use until unless it is qualitative, right? So first point, it is an issue in the education sector. Second issue, high dropouts. Now, high dropouts after your senior secondary stage. So many students, they drop out of secondary stage and don't reach senior secondary stage. And if you talk about higher education stage, the condition is even poor. So higher dropouts. Now again, there can be multitudinal reasons for it. Poverty can be one of the reason, or let's say low literacy level, family background can be one of the reason, or low awareness levels can be one of the reason, or social factors can be one of the reason. For the gender related dropout rate for the females, that is also one of the reason, female dropout rates. So patriarchy can be a reason for that. Gender disparity, gender inequality can be a reason for that. But high dropout rate, again, it is a problem for our country. Because if more people are dropping out of the education system in our country, of course, human capital formation will not take place, right? Human resource development will not take place. And because of this, again, our country would not be able to prosper. Low gross enrollment ratio. Now, this point we have already discussed, that gross enrollment ratio, especially in the higher education, is very low. Inadequate government expenditure. Now, on an estimated basis, government spends close to 3% of its GDP on education sector. Now, ideally, this rate or this percentage should be between 6 to 7%. On an ideal basis, 6 to 7% of our GDP should go to the education sector. Because as I told you, this is the foundation building block of the entire country, of the entire world, right? So considerable amount needs to be sanctioned by the government in this sector. So that is one challenge also, that insufficient government expenditure in this particular sector. Next is inadequate teacher training. Again, clubbing it with the first point that education quality is low. So inadequate teacher training, because of that only education quality is low. So teacher training manuals, they are not equipped enough. Teacher training programs, they are not very robust. They're not very extensive, right? Okay. High number of vacancies. Now this is in relation to the governmental schools. So schools run by the government, the colleges run by the government. There are huge number of vacancies which are there. You must be hearing a lot of controversies about the ad hoc professors being appointed, not giving a permanent position to them. So let's say if a professor is not very much secure about their job, Do you think they'll be able to contribute to the development of education of a country? The answer is no. First, they'll be worrying about their own job. So, first, the motive of the university or the government is to secure their jobs, give them a permanent position, not ad hoc positions. So, giving them permanent positions, securing them, and then training them in a way that they are writing or shaping the future of a nation. Right? So, high number of vacancies, this is a very big problem. Redundant curriculum. Now, again, curriculum is not skill based. The school curriculum which you see, colleges curriculum. Of course, I'm not talking about the IITs or NITs or AIMS or the prominent institutions, that is, institutions of international importance or institutions of eminence. They are just 100, 115 number. What about the other institutions which are there in our country? The private institutions, the other governmental schools, the local governmental colleges which are there in your area, right? In every area, there are local governmental colleges, women colleges as well, boys colleges, some co-education colleges as well. What about the quality of education in them? And what about the curriculum in those colleges? So curriculum is not revised, it is not updated regularly, right? And it is not market based. So it is just theoretical, which again is not very much important for the students. And students also do not learn a great deal from those curriculums. So that is also a very big issue. Academic research. So many students, they opt out in the senior secondary stage only. And very less number of students go to higher education, and even lesser students go for academic research. And if students are not going into academic research in sciences, in arts, in humanities, in commerce, if they're not doing research, of course, the research and development and the overall state of technology in our country would be lower, right? So that is again a very big challenge. Then poor infrastructure. Now, poor infrastructure also very important point, that the schools, the infrastructure in the schools, especially the government aided schools, and also especially in the rural areas, the infrastructure is very, very poor. It is inadequate. Classes are not proper, smart classes are not there, benches are not proper, students are made to sit on the floor, right? Amenities are not provided to the students, and leave that as well. The textbooks not being provided to the students, the notebooks not being provided to the students, right? So regular study material also not being provided to the students. Again, that is incapacity and lack of infrastructure, right? So again, this is a very big issue and challenge in the education sector of our country. Now, what have been the measures which have been taken by the government? Of course, a very historic measure was 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, which inserted Article 21A into our fundamental rights, into our constitution. And according to this, it gives free and compulsory education to the students or children from 6 to 14 years of age. This was a historic step. And again, subsequently, the Right to Education Act of 2009, again a very historic step, providing free education to all the students, right? So these two steps again played a very pivotal role in changing the landscape of education sector. But just by these act and constitutional amendment alone, will that suffice to improve the education sector? The answer is no. Each state, each district, each municipality, and the central government as a whole has to work in synergy in order to ensure education sector in our country becomes prosperous. Your National Education Policy 2020, again a very, very historic step, providing skill-based education in mother tongue, giving various avenues to drop out also, and then again rejoin the institution, the colleges, credit system development, all those points under the National Education Policy of 2020. They're very important to ensure that education landscape of our country improves, and especially the qualitative landscape of education in our country. Then your STARS program, we were discussing about the lack of teacher training, right? So the STARS program, that is strengthening teachers' learning and results for state scheme, has been launched, of course. Then your Diksha portal. The aim of Diksha portal is one nation, one digital platform. Digital platform for the school-based education to enhance the levels of school-based education. This Diksha portal has been launched by the government. Then your SWAYAM courses. So SWAYAM portal is there, where MOOC courses, that is massive online open courses, are there. So students from all the colleges can attend the open courses which are taught by the eminent personalities from the IITs, NITs, the prominent institutions, right? So again, they can get quality education at their home only, just through the online devices. So these are the steps which are taken by the government. Of course, implementation of these steps is very, very important. Steps in itself won't change the education landscape. Implementation by the bureaucracy and implementation by the school administration, local school administration is very, very critical in this. And of course, we are having case studies of Norway, of Finland, of Denmark, of course, of Scandinavian countries and Nordic countries with us, and also the case studies from Switzerland, case study from Singapore, case study from South Korea, right? And if we see all of these countries, we'll be able to understand that how they changed the education landscape. Eventually, it gave them a long-term gain, long-term results. And if you want to know more, of course, you can go through the TSR Subramaniam Committee report. It also talks about a lot of initiatives which can be taken by the government further, right, in order to improve the education landscape of our country. So I've mentioned this report particularly for you all as a homework, that you go and see this report once and see what all avenues can be done, or what all points can be implemented by the government further in order to improve the education sector, right? You'll be able to understand a bit more about the education landscape of our country, which is very, very critical for us. Okay. So I hope this topic is very clear to all of you. Now moving on to the second topic. It is related to inflation, demand or supply issues of inflation. Now, why this is in news? Because an article has been published by RBI, which concludes that the supply side factors account for 55% of consumer price index headline inflation. Now, what is CPI, which we have discussed a few days back only in one of the analyst videos? You can see that to understand what is the CPI, WPI. What we have to discuss today is the inflation and the different types of inflation, supply side, demand side of inflation, all those things we'll discuss. Of course, for your general studies paper 3 Indian economy section, this topic is highly, highly critical. Now, first thing which we should know is, what is this inflation? I've discussed it multiple times in this analyst itself, that what is inflation. So all of you must be knowing till now that inflation refers to the sustained increase in prices of commodities in a country. So prices of goods and services in a country, if there is a sustained increase in the prices, that is your inflation. So increase in prices of goods and services. But what is this disinflation and deflation? So they are very, very important, and many students confuse between disinflation and deflation, right? So first of all, be very, very clear that inflation means rise in prices. And deflation, of course, it's the opposite of it. So deflation would mean decline, sustained decline in the price of goods and services in an economy, right? So inflation and deflation, I hope it is clear. Now coming to the term of disinflation, what is this disinflation? So what happens is, let's say 1 year inflation is at 5%. So inflation is increasing at 5%. Another year, in the first year, inflation is at 5%. Second year inflation is at 10%. Third year inflation is at 15%. Of course, you see over the years inflation is growing, right? Inflation is growing. But let's take a scenario. Let's say in the first year inflation is 10%. In the second year inflation is 8%. In the third year inflation is 5%. What do we see? That inflation is there. Every year, in the first year also there is 10% inflation, second year also 8% inflation, third year also 5% inflation, but the rate of inflation has dropped. So price is of course increasing. First year it increased by 10%, second year it increased by 8%, third year it increased by 5%. So inflation is there, but the rate of inflation has declined over the years. And that is what you call as your disinflation. So decline in the rate of inflation. Inflation is still there. Rise in price of goods and services is still there, but the rate has declined. That is your disinflation. So inflation means increase in price of commodities. Deflation means a decline in the price of commodities. And disinflation means a decrease in the rate of inflation over the years. I hope this is crystal clear to all of you. Now the different kinds of inflation. Now this is very important, especially the demand and supply side. So demand pull inflation is there. Demand pull inflation. So let's say there is an economy, right? Small economy. And let's say that economy only 10 chocolates are produced. So in a small economy, only 10 chocolates are produced. And the population is of course very, very huge. So if only 10 chocolates are produced, and only 10 people are demanding it, and let's say the price is 10 rupees. So 10 people are demanding 10 chocolates, price is rupees 10. Now let's say 10 chocolates only are being produced and 20 people, earlier 10 people were demanding, now 20 people start demanding the chocolates. Do you think the price is going to increase? Yes, of course. The supply remains the same, right? And more people are demanding the same commodity. The people would be saying that I am willing to pay even 11 rupees for the commodity. I'm willing to pay even 12 rupees for the commodity. And let's say, what if 100 people are demanding the same 10 chocolates? So there would be more people willing to pay even more. And that the shopkeeper will also see. So they will increase the price of their chocolates because they will see that the demand of my product is very, very huge. And where did you see this kind of inflation? You saw this kind of inflation during the COVID-19 time. When the mask supply was limited, when the supply of oxygen was limited, supply of sanitizers was limited, at that point in time, what happened? The price of sanitizer, which was earlier 20-30 rupees a bottle, it shot up to 200, 300, 500 rupees, right? Because demand of sanitizers became very, very high, right? So this we have to understand that whenever demand increases of a commodity and supply is relatively lesser, inflation would occur, prices would increase, and that is what is a demand pull inflation. That is, demand is pulling the prices up because people are demanding a commodity, so they're pulling the prices up. That is demand pull inflation. Now another type of inflation is your cost push inflation. Now cost push inflation is very, very simple. Cost is from the perspective of the producer. So producer is incurring various costs in the production process of production. And if the cost increases, cost of production for the producer increases, of course, won't they be increasing the price? Yes, of course, they'll be increasing the price. And if they increase the price, the cost push inflation, the inflation would be occurring. That means if they're increasing the price of the goods and services which they're giving, because of increase in cost of production, inflation would occur in the economy. And this inflation has been pushed up, this rise in price has been pushed up because of the increase in cost of production. That is why it is known as cost push inflation. I hope it is very clear to all of you. Now coming to creeping inflation. Now creeping inflation is very, very simple. That is slow and sustained increase in prices over a period of time. So over the 10 years, slowly the price is increasing. That is, it's creeping, but it is increasing, right? So creeping inflation, it's very, very simple. Galloping inflation. So usually the double digit inflation, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% inflation. That is what we call as galloping inflation, very high levels of inflation. And hyperinflation, it is the next level of inflation, the super high inflation, more than 50% a month, right? So in a month, if the 50% prices or more are increasing, that is your hyperinflation. That is extremely high levels of inflation. Of course, it has been experienced by a lot of countries, including your Greece and other European nations as well. Currently, many countries are facing this kind of inflation. These next level high inflation, many countries are facing it, right? So you can see their case studies as well to understand how this inflation impacts their economy, right? During the World War II as well, we could see these instances happening that the prices shot up by 200%, 300%, right? So recently, Pakistan was also seeing a very high level of inflation, right? So calling it galloping inflation would not be wrong because on some sectors there was, of course, galloping inflation in Pakistan, right? Okay, now last but not the least, it is stagflation. Now again, many students confuse with the stagflation, but it's very, very simple. Stagflation, of course, means your high levels of inflation. Inflation is high, but along with high inflation, there is high level of unemployment as well. So people are losing their jobs. Prices are increasing. People are losing their jobs. High level of unemployment is there, and slow economic growth is there. So clubbing of these three things, combination of these three things forms your stagflation. Stagflation means high levels of inflation, high level of unemployment, and slower economic growth. I hope this stagflation is also clear to all of you. And I hope this demand and supply side of inflation is also very, very clear to all of you. Now, coming to a very small thing, that is inflation targeting. So as you know, monetary policy committee is there in our country, of course, formed by the RBI and the government representatives. So monetary policy committee, they come up with the inflation target, right? And currently the inflation target is 4% plus minus 2, right? So currently this is the inflation target in our country, that we have to target this level of inflation. So we have to keep inflation under the bracket of 2% to 6%. Of course, in the last 2 or 3 years, sometimes we have had some a little bit inflation below 2%, sometimes a little bit above 6% as well. But more or less, we have stayed under this bracket only. Inflation targeting. So we are targeting certain level of inflation in our economy. I hope this inflation targeting is also clear to all of you. Now, one question for all of you, which you have to tell me in the comment section, that this inflation targeting, it happens in which frequency? After how many years RBI and this Monetary Policy Committee sets up this inflation target? And in which year the latest inflation targeting happened? Let me know in the comment section the answers to these. Now, coming to the third topic, it's related to sovereign AI, that is sovereign artificial intelligence. Now, India's artificial intelligence mission to develop own sovereign AI is ongoing. And for your general studies paper 3 science and technology, the sovereign AI becomes very, very important. So first we need to understand what is the sovereign artificial intelligence. So the artificial intelligence tools, right, which are developed by a country, which are indigenous to our country, and we are having control to our own artificial intelligence units or softwares, that is what you call as sovereign AI. So indigenously developed artificial intelligence products, that is your sovereign AI, on which our country is having control. The AI products developed by Google or Microsoft or your OpenAI, the products developed by them, India is not having control over them, right? So they're not sovereign, they're not indigenously built. Sovereign AI means building our own AI capabilities, artificial intelligence capabilities. What is the significance of sovereign AI? First significance is, of course, it protects the interests of people of our country because we are building it indigenously, right? Second is ethical AI usage. Because it is built in our country, we can ensure that AI is used for ethical purposes and not used for unethical purposes, because we are having more regulation towards it, more control towards it. Of course, for a national security perspective as well, because it will be indigenously built, the other companies from the outside, if they are building AI tools and they're launching it into our country, of course there is a threat to national security of our country, right? So indigenous sovereign AI will reduce the national security threat. And of course, economic growth will also prosper because AI tools will be giving jobs to a lot of people, jobs to a lot of sectors, indigenously built AI, job to a lot of sectors, ultimately generating employment as well and income as well, leading to economic growth. And the government would be having, of course, control over critical artificial intelligence tools, which are again important to ensure our national security. I hope the significance of it is very, very clear to all of you. So government is planning to build a comprehensive artificial intelligence ecosystem, which will be under the government of India. And the focus is, of course, on a real life applications that build that kind of artificial intelligence tools or softwares which are having real life applications, which can be used in your healthcare sector, agriculture sector, education sector to enhance the level of governance in our country, e-governance, right? So building those kind of softwares. And what are the components of it? The biggest component is building a DPI, that is digital public infrastructure. Now, digital public infrastructure in the lines of your UPI and Aadhaar, Unified Payment Interface, and the Aadhaar when it was built. So in the same lines, creating a DPI for artificial intelligence as well. And what is this DPI? So in this digital public infrastructure, first of all, the government will be sanctioning the project. And government will be having control over the software or the artificial intelligence tools. And later it will be extended to the private sector for the diverse use cases, that you can now use it for diverse uses. But first, the sanctioning will be done by the government only. That ways we can again be able to ensure national security and control over the critical AI. And in all of these, of course, government will have a very important role to play in the regulation of artificial intelligence. And at the same line, the data protection bill which is coming up, right? It is very, very important, this data protection bill, in ensuring this artificial intelligence is secure and it's regulated properly. I hope this is very clear to all of you. Now coming to the topic of Liberalized Remittance Scheme, LRS. Now why it is news? Because this Liberalized Remittance Scheme, so outflow from our country has dropped by 37.68% in October. Outflow means the liberalized remittance scheme, that is the remittance which are going out of our country. That is your outflow. So they have declined. LRS outflow has declined in our country. Now, why? What's the reason for that? What is LRS? We'll understand that. Again, for our general studies paper 3 Indian economy section, this is very, very important. Now, liberalized remittance scheme. So it is a scheme which liberalizes the remittances and the outward remittances made by Indians to the other countries. So it was launched in the year 2004 by the Reserve Bank of India, and the aim and the goal of this LRS was to simplify and streamline the process of remitting funds, that is sending the funds outside of our country. So remitting funds outside of India, that is your liberalized remittance scheme. Now, in this liberalized remittance scheme, we have seen that there has been a dip in October, close to 30% dip in the October month of this year. Now, why there is a dip? Because from 1st of October, this tax collected at source has become a 20%, right? Earlier, of course, for various of transactions, it was not even existing or was 5%. Now, the tax collected at source from this year has become 20%. So, because of this high tax collected at source, the outward remittance under liberalized remittance scheme has seen a dip, has seen a decline. So, under this LRS scheme, first of all, the Indian residents, they can send up to $250,000. So $250,000 overseas in a year through this liberalized remittance scheme. Now let us see what are the various type of remittances and what are the earlier TCS rates and what are the present TCS rates, that is after the proposed reforms. Presently, what are the rates, right? And this is the old one, right? This is the old one, right? The rates which were existing earlier. So for educational purposes, if the amount is remitted, of course, for educational loan from the financial institution, earlier it was 0.5% of the aggregate if the amount is in excess of 7 lakhs. Of course, it remains unchanged. For education purposes earlier, for other than the first purposes, other than the first case scenario, it was 5% of the amount if the amount exceeds 10 lakh. Outward remittance exceeds 7 lakh, right? So again, there is no change currently on it. But coming to the overseas tour packages, so earlier it was 5% without any threshold limit. Right now, it is 0% of course till 7 lakh. But if more than 7 lakh, then 20% tax collected at source you need to pay, right? So 20% TCS needs to be paid if the amount is more than 7 lakh for this case. And for any other cases, again, 20% you have to pay if the amount is more than 7 lakh. So more than 7 lakh, again, 20% of the tax collected at source you have to pay. Earlier it was 5%. So that's the difference. That is the tax collected at source under this liberalized remittance scheme has increased, right? And of course, this provision was given in the budget of 2023. And that is why it became a very huge issue for our national importance as well. And a lot of articles, a lot of editorials were written on it a few months back. But right now, we got to know that after it is implemented, the liberalized remittance scheme under that, the outflow has declined because of increase in the tax collected at source. I hope this liberalized remittance scheme is also clear, and this tax collected at source, how this impacted the LRS outflow, it is also very clear to all of you. Now coming to the last topic, but not the least, it is related to India's Telegraph Act, Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. Now, why this is in news? Because Lok Sabha has recently passed the Telecommunication Bill of 2023, and it will replace the 138-year-old Telegraph Act of 1885. So we have to understand this Telegraph Act first of 1885, and then once this bill becomes an act, we'll try to understand this Telecom Bill of 2023 as well. So Telecom Act, when it becomes, we'll have a session in Analyst whereby we'll be covering this Telecom Act as well. For our General Studies Paper 2, Indian Polity and Constitution, this topic is very, very important. So what is this Indian Telegraph Act of 1885? So this act, first of all, governs the usage of wired and wireless telegraphy. So wired and wireless telegraphy, wired and wireless telephones, teletypes, radio communication, and digital data communication. So it governs the usage of all these things, whether be it wired or wireless communication devices. And it gives exclusive jurisdiction to the government and privilege for establishing, maintaining, and operating. So, establishing these communication networks, maintaining these communication networks, operating, licensing, and oversighting all forms of wired and wireless communication within the Indian territory. So Indian government is having the exclusive jurisdiction for what? For establishing, monitoring, operating, licensing, and oversight in all form of communication, wired and wireless communications in our country. Indian government is having the exclusive jurisdiction under this act. And of course, it governs the usage of all the communication networks we saw in the first point. Now, under this, there is Section 5, subsection 2, under this particular act. Now, this is the most important section of this act. And that is why it remains mostly in news as well. Because it allows for the interception of calls. That is, the government can hear the calls or intercept the calls. The state government and the central government can make an order to intercept the calls. But in what cases they can make, or in what interests they can have that interception of calls, first is to ensure sovereignty and integrity of India, right? So that is the first reason, sovereignty, integrity of India. Second is the security of the state. Third is friendly relation with the foreign states. Last is public order, or for preventing incitement to commission of an offense. So in all these reasons, in all these cases, the central government or state government can order for interception of calls under this Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. And that is the primary reason why this act was very controversial, right? And of course, there is one more proviso in this act under the section 5, subsection 2 only, that this cannot be implemented in case of journalist. So this interception of calls cannot take place in case of journalists. This is a very important point, having the probability to be asked in your examinations. Now, one very important case is related to this act. That is your PUCL versus Union of India 1996. So your Public Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India 1996, it talks about this Indian Telegraph Act, where Supreme Court held that the lack of provisional safeguards is there in this act. So there is lack of provisional safeguards, and they give certain guidelines in which this act can be improved and which needs to be implemented in this particular act. And they also suggested formation of a review committee, that a review committee should be formed whereby it will look into the authorizations given by the central government or state government for the interception of calls of individuals, right? So a review committee will be established. That is what Supreme Court said in this PUCL versus Union of India case 1996. I hope this Indian Telegraph Act of 1885 is very, very clear to all of you. So it is now being replaced by the Telecommunication Bill of 2023. Now it is yet to be seen. It has been passed by the Lok Sabha. Now it will go to the Rajya Sabha. Eventually, President will be signing the particular bill and it will turn into an act. So when it turns into act, then it becomes more important for our examination, and then we'll see it and cover it in the analyst as well. Till then, Indian Telegraph Act also 1885, the background story of it you need to know. I hope this is very, very clear to all of you and you understood and learned something from this lecture. So all the very best to all of you and have a very nice day. Good luck.